Imagine you're alone in a massive beach house. The silence is deafening. Then you hear it, movement from a closet where no one should be. What happens next will make your blood run cold. Today I'm sharing 3 absolutely chilling encounters that happen at beach houses, and I promise you, the final story will leave you speechless. These aren't urban legends. These are real experiences from real people. Let's dive in. Story 1. The man in the closet, music eerie, unsettling ambient sounds. This nightmare unfolded several months back during springtime. I was trapped in this bizarre transitional phase of existence. Freshly graduated, completely responsibility-free, drowning in excessive spare time. Finishing university an entire semester ahead of schedule had seemed brilliant while buried under mountains of coursework. But once that freedom actually materialized, I had absolutely zero idea how to fill those endless empty hours. My career wouldn't officially begin until June arrived, and practically everyone I knew remained consumed by their remaining classes and final examinations. Until then, I existed in this uncomfortable limbo, suspended awkwardly between 2 completely different life chapters. The feeling was genuinely disturbing. It made me feel utterly worthless. I've always been the type who absolutely needs productive activity, so simply existing day after day watching time evaporate was absolutely destroying me mentally. That's probably why I immediately agreed when Mom requested I check on Uncle Rick's beach property. The task seemed straightforward enough. Make the drive down to Rehoboth Beach, inspect for potential leaks or damage, handle some basic maintenance to save Rick from hiring professional help. I should mention, I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and Rick's property sits in Delaware, so the journey isn't particularly demanding, just slightly over 2 hours of highway driving. The house itself? Absolutely massive. The kind of property that comfortably accommodates my entire extended family every summer season. 25 people crammed together under one roof, playing endless board games and consuming way too much alcohol. Those 2 activities honestly define our family gatherings completely. The property isn't directly on the shoreline, but the beach remains within easy walking distance. It's nestled in this peaceful neighborhood characterized by tall beach grass, swaying everywhere, and roads that wind unpredictably. Fast forward to some completely forgettable weekday. Honestly, can't even remember which one. Thursday, maybe? I departed during late afternoon, which looking back was probably incredibly stupid timing. The drive passed uneventfully. Arriving at the property, everything appeared completely normal initially. I entered using Rick's key and methodically worked through his maintenance checklist, inspected all the faucets, checked the electrical breakers, walked the entire property perimeter. Everything seemed perfectly fine. To be completely honest, being there alone felt deeply strange. I genuinely never experienced that house without scatterboard games everywhere and noisy crowds of relatives drinking and laughing constantly. The silence was definitely the most unsettling aspect. The entire place felt abandoned, deserted even. I'm confident everyone has that one location, whether it's a house, restaurant, or somewhere else entirely. That becomes absolutely chaotic when your whole family gathers there together. Now imagine that exact same place completely empty and silent. Pretty creepy, right? Anyway, darkness approached rapidly, and I absolutely despised nighttime driving more than practically anything. So I texted Mom explaining I'd simply stay overnight and return during morning daylight. She agreed this made sense and reminded me to thank Uncle Rick for allowing the overnight stay, which I immediately did. I prepared some food, scrolled mindlessly through my phone briefly, then started my nighttime routine. Typically during family gatherings, I get stuck in one of the smaller third-floor bedrooms while other relatives claim the nicer, more spacious rooms. I'm not complaining about this system whatsoever, just explaining how things typically worked. Since I had the entire house to myself that evening, though, I figured why not take advantage? The master bedroom on the 2nd floor features a private bathroom, an enormous walk-in closet, and this ridiculously comfortable bed. The decision wasn't exactly difficult. That's definitely where I'd be sleeping. I climbed in around midnight and drifted off quickly. I can't remember the exact time when I jolted awake, only that something had startled me from sleep. I remained somewhat groggy, but felt absolutely certain a sound had just emanated from the closet. like something had fallen inside there. Without making any noise whatsoever, I craned my head toward the closet. Even that minimal movement sent my heartbeat absolutely racing. My mind was completely awake, but my body absolutely refused movement, like some bizarre sleep paralysis without the actual paralysis component. I could move physically. I just didn't want to. Didn't want to discover if something was actually hiding in that closet. I squeezed my eyes shut tightly and commanded myself to return to sleep, and I almost succeeded. But the literal instant I started drifting back into unconsciousness, I heard it again, a muffled thump from inside the closet. I squinted my eyes just barely and tried desperately convincing myself I'd imagined the sound. But I knew better. I absolutely hadn't. As if some invisible force had seized control, I laid there in complete, genuine paralysis with absolutely no bodily control whatsoever. Unlike before, this time it was absolutely real. I couldn't move even if I desperately wanted to. Until that terrifying moment, I didn't truly comprehend what being frozen in place actually meant. I listened in absolute horror as the closet door slowly creaked open with agonizing slowness. Through barely open eyes, I watched as this dark silhouette stepped deliberately into the room. It simply stood there beside the bed, motionlessly watching me in the darkness. Maybe 20 seconds passed, each individual second feeling impossibly, unbearably long. Then, silently, it turned and departed the room. I remained completely motionless, barely breathing at all. The footsteps moved across the floor, but instead of heading downstairs like I desperately expected, they actually creaked upstairs toward the third floor. My stomach absolutely churned. The only staircase led upward. There was no exit from that level. No escape route whatsoever. My mind was screaming desperately at me to take action, but terror kept me frozen. I couldn't physically overpower a grown man. I had zero idea if he carried weapons. The only option was waiting, hiding. After several agonizing moments trapped inside my own panic thoughts, I summoned enough courage to snap myself out of paralysis. Quietly as possible, I reached for my phone and dialed emergency services. As soon as the dispatcher answered, I whispered as quietly as humanly possible, explaining someone was inside the house. I slipped out of bed and just as silently engaged the bedroom door lock. Then I waited in absolute terror. Minutes dragged by painfully until flashing red and blue emergency lights illuminated the windows outside. I was genuinely shocked at how rapidly the police actually arrived. I sprinted down the stairs, threw open the front door, and nearly collapsed in complete relief seeing the officers. They didn't hesitate, even slightly. They stormed inside immediately, moving swiftly through the property's interior. I remained outside, trembling. It didn't take them long at all. According to them, the house was completely empty. Nobody inside. I stood there in complete disbelief. I had clearly heard those footsteps ascending, and there was literally nowhere to go after reaching that level. So he absolutely must have remained inside the house. There was no alternative explanation possible. The police insisted he must have slipped past me somehow, that I was too frightened to notice his escape. I knew that wasn't true, but what could I possibly say? The intruder had seemingly vanished into thin air. I wasn't comfortable letting the police simply leave, though, so I immediately called Rick. Rick absolutely wasn't having it. He snapped at the officers and demanded they search again, insisting my life might genuinely depend on it. So they complied. They searched again, far more thoroughly this time. Rick told me to follow them closely and observe what they were doing. So I did exactly that. The officers moved methodically, opening every single closet and checking under each bed, tapping walls like they expected something hidden behind the plaster. They pulled back shower curtains in every bathroom, double-checked locks on all doors and windows. That's when they discovered it. One of the bedroom windows on the third floor, specifically the room I should have been sleeping in, was completely unlocked. One officer remained stationed by the door, while the other descended and stepped onto the back deck. I opted to go outside with the second officer, mostly because the thought of being locked inside the house with some stranger absolutely sickened me. The officer illuminated the property with his flashlight, but initially there was nothing visible out there. He started scanning the roofline systematically. To my absolute horror, his beam swept across something absolutely terrifying. It was him, the stranger who'd been inside the house. He was simply sitting there on the roof, this disgusting-looking bald man wearing tattered, filthy clothing who looked like he hadn't encountered a shower in years. The following hour became an absolute blur. The cops communicated with each other and extracted the man off the roof in handcuffs. The police explained he was probably homeless and had been squatting in the house for days, possibly even longer. But when they questioned him about how he'd gained entry, how long he'd been there, and why he'd been hiding in the closet, he refused to answer anything. He just maintained this eerie, vacant expression, like none of it mattered to him whatsoever. He was in the back of their police cruiser shortly after that. And that was that. The entire experience was so absolutely crazy that it remains difficult wrapping my head around even now. As much as I try, I cannot figure out why that man had been hiding in that specific closet of all possible places. Maybe he heard me entering the house and hid in the first location he thought of? I still don't know how he actually got inside the house initially. Rick doesn't know either. It's impossible to access the roof from ground level, so that explanation seems pretty logical. The rest of my extended family has been insisting Rick upgrades his home security significantly, but he's refused every single time for reasons I genuinely can't explain. The thought that had I been sleeping in my assigned bedroom, that night might have ended very, very differently. Story 2. The device. My buddy Mike has this beach house on the Jersey Shore. Calling it beautiful would be a massive understatement. It's absolutely magnificent. Or at least that's how it appears to someone who never came from wealth. I obviously don't know the complete history. It's not my family's property after all. But from what I understand, that house has been in their family for multiple generations. Mike's grandparents have been attempting to use it as their permanent primary residence for the longest time. But unfortunately, they recently passed away. Without anyone actually living there anymore, the house sits dormant most of the time since most of Mike's extended family lives on the West Coast, and his parents remain too busy to utilize it properly. The upside to an otherwise sad situation, though, is that Mike has essentially free access to it whenever he wants. I'm pretty certain it was Mike's father's intention to rent the property out to generate some extra income. But as far as I know, those plans aren't exactly progressing. It's not exactly simple finding someone willing to rent a beach house during the off-season, so you can't really blame him. It was sometime during mid-July when Mike contacted me and asked if I want to come down for the weekend. He didn't have to twist my arm whatsoever. I had absolutely nothing planned, and the thought of relaxing at a beach house, especially one this nice, was an immediate yes. His plan was straightforward. We'd hang out, maybe hit the beach during daylight hours, then head to the boardwalk at night and simply enjoy the shore for what it was. It wasn't some wild party weekend or anything remotely like that, just a chill escape from our usual routine. And honestly, I was genuinely looking forward to it. Mike and I live pretty close together, so he was planning to pick me up and drive us down together. That Friday, I packed a duffel bag, threw in his trunk, and the two of us made the drive down together. The first night was completely chill. We arrived sometime around 6 o'clock, dropped our stuff off in the upstairs bedrooms, and settled in comfortably. The house has that cozy, slightly musty beach house smell, like a combination of salt air and aged wood. Not in a negative way, more like history. You could tell it had witnessed decades of family summers. After grabbing a quick bite from a nearby sub shop, we decided to walk the beach briefly just to absorb the evening atmosphere. Mike brought a couple fishing rods with him, so we figured we'd try our luck fishing for a while. It wasn't really about catching anything, though. It was more about simply being out there. At one point, we encountered a pair of girls about our age. They were walking barefoot along the shoreline, and Mike struck up conversation immediately. They were local, or at least semi-local, and it transformed into one of those low-stakes, slightly flirtatious interactions that happen naturally when you're young and on the beach at night. We exchanged numbers, and they continued their walk while we continued fishing. There was still a decent number of people around since it was peak tourist season, but Mike knew all the quiet, hidden pockets, private beach access points, tucked away pods through dunes, little spots between houses where the lights didn't reach. We ended up finding a nice stretch completely to ourselves where the only sound was the water and the wind. It was the kind of night that made you forget about real life temporarily. The next morning, we woke up around 9 and decided to go for a run along the boardwalk. It was already warm outside by then, but there was a breeze coming off the ocean that made it bearable. We weren't doing anything crazy, just a couple miles to get the blood flowing. Mike's a pretty active guy, and I've been trying to stay in shape, so it felt good to move after a night of lounging around. The rest of the day kind of slipped by without us really noticing. Later that evening, Mike floated the idea of hitting a few bars in Seaside, but we were both completely wiped. Even though the idea sounded fun in theory, the thought of waiting in line and yelling over music didn't really align with how our bodies felt after a full day in sun. We ended up crashing kind of early instead. Sometime after midnight, I jolted awake to this shrill, piercing beeping sound. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but after a second or two of lying there in the darkness, I realized it was absolutely real. It sounded like a smoke detector, one of those sharp, high-pitched alarms that cut straight through your skull. I threw myself out of bed and started scanning my surroundings, desperately trying to pinpoint where the beeping originated from. It didn't sound like it was coming from my bedroom or anywhere else on the second floor. After focusing for a few more seconds, I got the distinct impression that it was actually coming from above me. Without thinking, I yanked the bedroom door open and made a beeline for Mike's room. With both hands, I jolted him awake and told him to follow me immediately. He immediately caught on to the situation and hurried after me, not even bothering to put a shirt on, as if our lives depended on it. The two of us bolted up the stairs, completely unsure of what we'd be running into. The third floor was mostly dark, except for a little bit of moonlight leaking in through the window at the end of the hallway. We flipped the lights on and started scanning the space, still expecting to see or smell something burning, but there was absolutely nothing. No smoke, no flickering lights, no signs of a fire whatsoever. Actually, it was completely baffling. Eventually, after some painfully irritating minutes of searching for the source of that god-awful noise, I found something in one of the bedrooms, tucked neatly under a pillow, a small black device. Before calling Mike into the room, I decided to examine it myself briefly, mostly out of pure confusion. It was the size of a walkie-talkie, completely black with the exception of a blinking red light on top. That was it. No buttons, no stickers, no screen. Just a smooth jet-black casing, that blinking light, and a single switch on the side. Or at least what appeared to be a switch. I flipped it off, and the beeping stopped immediately. Mike entered the room at the same exact time. His eyes flicked from the bed to me to the device in my hand. Neither of us said anything initially. We locked eyes, and I could tell he was just as confused and just as terrified as I was. After a few more seconds of silence, he asked me if I had ever seen that black thing before. I said no and asked him the same question, to which he also said no. For the next hour, we tried desperately figuring out what that thing was, how it had gotten there, and what had triggered it. But no answer we came up with was remotely satisfying. Mike swore none of his family members had been in that house in ages. And I believe him completely. I mean, why would he lie about that? Plus, who the hell would put that thing in their own home? You might think it was for safety purposes or something, or maybe a substitute for a faulty upstairs smoke detector. But again, there was no fire, so it hadn't even prevented any emergencies. And then no matter how it had gotten triggered in the first place, that was the absolute scariest part about the whole thing. We were sitting in Mike's room in the darkness when I had a crazy thought. I couldn't believe it hadn't occurred to me until then. The switch? I pulled out the device and very quickly flipped the switch on and off. And you guessed it, the shrill beeping started up again and stopped as soon as I flipped it off. Both of us froze completely and Mike whispered, "Oh my God." The thought hit us both simultaneously. The only way to operate the device was by hand. Someone else was in the house. We didn't waste any time whatsoever. Mike dialed the police while I locked the door, barricading it as best I could with furniture. We waited for what felt like an eternity, and finally the police showed up. We quickly made our way downstairs to intercept them. After giving them a very brief description of what was happening, they did a full sweep of the house while we waited outside by the front door per their instruction. When they finally came back downstairs, what they told us was absolutely horrifying. Apparently, every single window on the third floor was wide open, even the bathroom windows. And it wasn't just that. The beds were completely flipped, drawers were pulled out of dressers, and everything was scattered on the floor. The room where I had found the device looked completely ransacked, absolutely destroyed. Even though it was nice and neat when we'd searched up there earlier, I felt like I was losing my mind. And so did Mike. But after being escorted upstairs by the officers, we had no choice but to accept the horrifying reality. The officers didn't find much else. No one hiding, no prints, no weapons. After another 20 minutes or so, they told us to make sure all the windows were locked and secured from now on, and to call again if anything else happened. Then they just left. Mike and I didn't feel safe being in that house after someone, probably crazy or on drugs, had messed with us like that in such an unexplainable way. But we had no choice. We told ourselves we'd sleep there the rest of the night and leave early in the morning. And that's exactly what we did. Luckily, whoever had been in the house must have left because nothing else happened throughout the night. There are still parts of this night I can't explain, and I can only imagine what Mike must be feeling. For all we know, whoever had been in that house that night might have never actually left. Story 3. The Beach House Predators. Music eerie. Ominous. Building dread. This happened a decent while ago when I was 22 years old. Enough years have passed to the point where I feel safe talking about it publicly. I was fresh out of college with a desirable job and minimal expenses since I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that, racking up considerable savings without having to worry about food or housing, and all the while having full access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Believe me, I knew how incredibly lucky I was to have parents who allowed me to stay at home rent-free. I know many people don't have that option, so it's something I never took for granted. But not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened not even 1 month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol. I don't spend every ounce of my free time at clubs. And I definitely don't allow men to dictate my life in any way whatsoever. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture absolutely disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, go to the gym, read a bit of my book at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, mini road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide I want to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other 2 friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from the way Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like an absolute dream. Quiet, tucked away from the touristy chaos on its own private beach and just a short walk from the water. To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons. So I had a feeling her beach house would be absolutely insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first laid eyes on it, I was awestruck. Look, I'm no architect, but I know a modern-style house when I see one. And Lindsay's must have been ultra-modern, because it looked more like a covert military-safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you pictures of it. Believe me, I've got plenty. But out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be in really poor taste, even if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen. The 4 of us unloaded our stuff and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay obviously had enough individual bedrooms for all of us to occupy, but what would be the fun in that? Instead, the 4 of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own attached bathroom. We'd been planning to stay 3 nights, which in my opinion is the perfect amount of time to spend coupled up with anyone other than your family. I tend to be relatively irritable, so anyone who's not clean or polite tend to tick me off pretty easily. Not that any of my friends are, but you know how it is. I know I told you about my relatively boring lifestyle already, but if there was a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely plan on letting loose a little more than I ordinarily would. We want to keep the first night pretty chill, though. So we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, stargazing. The 4 of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was this faint flickering light emanating from somewhere further down the shore. The four of us quieted down a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as eerie as it was. After a while, it became clear that the light was swinging back and forth like a handheld flashlight someone was walking with. And soon after, we realized that's exactly what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually walking in our direction. Not running or stumbling or moving strangely, but strolling at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing the sound of laughter, which caused all of us to relax a bit. Considering how late it was most likely just a group of teenagers or even people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point one of them yelled out, "Hi!" in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we made some small talk while they made their way over to us. As they approached, we could see that it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were digging, especially Thea. She's a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overtly flirtatious, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they ultimately invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning toward asleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends want to continue hanging out with the boys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to spoil everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back towards Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably towards wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered her in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped, and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water being splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline simultaneously. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and sprinted down the stairs. I asked her why she had called me instead of the police, and she reassured me that she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her instruction, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in a matter of minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and told me what direction it had gone in, and I slammed on the gas to try and catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an insanely unsafe speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes of driving, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up the phone, called the police, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance so as not to alert them to the situation. So that's what I did. After what felt like forever, I spotted cop lights up ahead. The car ahead of me didn't try to evade the police. I can only imagine that they assumed it was an unrelated stop. I pulled the car over and watched everything unfold. It was pure chaos. The cops forcibly removed all 3 men from the SUV at gunpoint. They put them in cuffs and escorted them back to one of the cruisers. Then one of the officers walked over to the trunk of the car and pulled it open to reveal both Thea and Sabrina bound, and from the looks of it pretty badly bruised. As horrifying as the whole experience was, it was nothing compared to the sequence of events told from their perspective. All 3 of them were comfortable with me writing this. By the way, we're still in close contact. So I obviously asked them, but none of them wanted to write it themselves, and for good reason. To keep things short, after I went to bed, they all continued drinking. Lindsay is the only one who remembers things clearly, since she was trying to be at least a little responsible given it was her family's house we were staying in. At some point, the guys Thea and Sabrina were suggested they all go to bed, So the four of them split off while Lindsay told the third guy she was going home. He was really upset about that, which Lindsay initially thought was because he wanted to get with her. She told him she would have been down, but had to watch her house, and he got angry. They yelled at each other for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get the hell out of his house and never come back, which she was more than happy doing. Halfway home, though, she realized she had forgotten her purse, so she went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of the car before driving off. She called the police, then me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers, and they jumped through dozens of hoops to do two things: keep the event as far away from public sphere as possible, and make sure those guys got maximum prison sentences. They accomplished both. Turns out the house they were staying in didn't even belong to them. It was owned by some random old couple who were on vacation in a different country. That, plus the slew of other crimes they were charged, would put them away for a long time. Although I still think there's no sentence long enough that can properly compensate for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this traumatized me for years. I couldn't do beaches late nights or talking to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed or how safe the situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a little while. But luckily, that's since changed. I can't even begin to imagine how this incident affected Thea and Sabrina. Part of me feels like not remembering anything is a blessing in disguise. I think the craziest part about the whole thing is the fact that had I not gone home, I might not have been able to reach Lindsay's car in time. And had it not been for that, the police may have never found those guys' car. Closing. So there you have it. 3 beach house experiences that transform from relaxing getaways into absolute nightmares. From a homeless man hiding in a closet for days, to the mysterious device operated by an unseen intruder, to the predators who nearly got away with kidnapping. These stories prove that even the most beautiful vacation homes can harbor unspeakable horrors. If these stories gave you chills, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss another terrifying tale. Drop a comment below telling me which story disturbed you the most, or share your own creepy beach house experience. And remember, next time you're staying somewhere unfamiliar, maybe check those closets, lock those windows, and never, ever trust strangers on the beach at night. Until next time, stay vigilant out there